So this session is going to be about emerging technologies, right? For the last couple of years, you've been hearing a lot about technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on. So today, we're going to look at these technologies from the finance angle. So as finance professionals, or perhaps as IT professionals supporting the finance function, first of all, why should you care about these technologies? What's in it for you? What's Oracle doing with these technologies? And finally, what can you do to sort of prepare yourself and position your organizations better for taking advantage of these technologies, right? So that's sort of the focus of today's session. And my name is Hari Shankar. I run product management and strategy for the enterprise performance management applications, or even after 10 years of acquisition, it's still called the Hyperion business. The brand is so strong, right? So I run product management strategy for that business, and I'll let the other panelists introduce themselves. Jack?
Yeah, I'm Jack Berkowitz. Excuse me. I run product strategy, product management, and data science for our machine learning and artificial intelligence programs that stretch across all of our applications. So with finance and ERP, but also into HCM, into customer experience, into supply chain.
Rob?
And hi, everybody. I'm Rob Zwieback, and I run the product development organization for our financials cloud. Excellent.
So let's get started. So by the way, I'm not just a moderator, I'm also a panelist. So if you wonder, why is this guy talking so much? It's because I'm a panelist too, okay? All right.
So you're going to ask yourself a question?
Exactly, yeah. Something like that. So anyway, let's start with the first thing, right? So as finance professionals, why should you care about all of these technologies? Your job is finance, not technology, so why should you care about these things? So let me make a couple of observations, then I'll turn it over to Jack. The first thing is, in simple terms, you want to pay attention to these technologies because your most important competitor is paying attention to them for sure, okay? So what does that mean? Because if you look at it, there's a lot of evidence that the top 5% of companies in any industry segment are today much more dominant than ever. So it's sort of a winner-takes-all type of model in many industries today. Most of us are familiar with it. So these technologies, to the extent they have disruptive power, you want to pay attention to them, you want to take advantage of them. And if you look at what is the prevalent attitude in finance today, it's a positive surprise. In fact, our CEO, Safra Katz, recently sort of talked about this in an interview. Normally, the perception of finance people is that you're all risk averse, you're paid not to take risks, you're paid to be conservative, right? That's the impression. But when you look at digital transformation initiatives at most of our customers today, it's oftentimes finance at the front of the line driving these transformation initiatives. And there's a lot of good reason for it. We'll talk about that today in the panel session, okay? So technology is not just for the CIO. Today, technology is very much at the center of focus of what finance is worried about today, okay? So that's what this session is about. Jack, you want to add some comments?
Well, I think the interesting thing about all of the technologies as they come together, it's hard to understand. Well, that's a great buzzword, but what does it mean to me? How's that going to affect my job? And just a couple of examples to toss out, right? So, for example, matching. I've got an invoice, I've got a PO, I've got a project. That matching problem, how can I actually accelerate getting that done using a technology that maybe I don't even know it's there, but it's a job aid to help me get my job done? And then we start to extend it, right? So we're getting involved in things like automatically doing invoice scanning. So just the same technologies people use for like facial recognition on Facebook or things like that, we can apply that to invoice scanning, tie it into the matching, and basically shorten a process that right now you might be using a BPO for or something else, shorten it into a matter of seconds to get you a very precise match and move on with your process. So really simple things, but going to be very, very powerful in your hands.
Yeah. So I think, there is a lot of, many of these technologies, whether it's blockchain or artificial intelligence or machine learning, they fall squarely in the context of what finance cares about. Okay, so let's take this a little deeper. I want to ask Rob to talk a little bit about blockchain. A lot of people are hearing blockchain. It's very much on the priority list of many CFOs. But I would say, I hate to say it this way, there's a lot of confusion about what the heck this is. Is it the same as Bitcoin? Is it different? So there's a lot of confusion. Maybe you can start there and then tell us what you see as the potential of blockchain technologies.
Okay, that's great. So There does seem to be a lot of confusion and a lot of kind of buzzwords being thrown around, but not a lot of clarity. And so if anybody is not aware, and please bear with me for just a couple minutes if not, but basically blockchain is the technology that Bitcoin is based upon, right? Bitcoin is essentially kind of one use of blockchain. It relies on the blockchain technology, but blockchain is far more than just Bitcoin. So what blockchain is all about is it's basically a distributed technology such that there can be a single source of truth, but it's distributed to kind of all of the different participants who are involved in a transaction or a set of transactions. And so as a result of that, you're able to guarantee trust even though you may not be the direct participant in one form of the transaction. So Bitcoin is a useful example. There may be loads and loads of different people who engage in transacting in Bitcoin, and so the kind of entire Bitcoin ledger, the entire kind of history of Bitcoin transactions is distributed. It's available in multiple places, and any single Bitcoin transaction has to be essentially approved by all of the kind of approval nodes within the blockchain network. And so as a result, there are multiple copies of the single source of truth. And as a result of that, each individual participant is able to have their own trusted copy. Now that's just the case of Bitcoin, but this idea is very powerful. We see a lot of interest in leveraging this type of technology in a lot of different ways. One of the kind of early proof points that we've done just a kind of prototype on that we are intending to productize over the fairly near future is around intercompany transactions. So many of our customers have all sorts of intercompany transactions happening between different subsidiaries, different trading partners, and we see blockchain as a very powerful mechanism to help companies essentially automate that process and ensure trust, ensure that there is a single source of truth, even though the kind of different parties involved may be very far flung, may be very disparate. And so by leveraging a technology like blockchain, we think that companies will be able to engage in these transactions, trusting that they're being recognized appropriately by all trading partners, and guaranteeing that when you get to the end of the month, the end of the quarter, you need to consolidate, you need to bring everything together, everything will tie out, everything will reconcile, and everything will eliminate. And that's really very compelling because that's the kind of activity that today takes a tremendous amount of manual effort because it never really works out quite as well as it's supposed to.
So one quick follow-up there. So do you see this sort of a distributed digital ledger sort of replacing the traditional ledger, or is it going to augment it? How do you see this?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that too. So thanks for bringing that up. We see this idea of a kind of distributed ledger or distributed set of financials as augmenting core financial system. We don't see it replacing. And some people disagree, and there is some talk about eventually kind of moving to a purely distributed blockchain-based financial system. We're a little skeptical. We think it's possible, but frankly, we think that's a little bit kind of utopian at this point. We don't really see that happening, certainly not in the near future.
Fair enough. Let's shift over to Jack. Jack, you're spending a lot of time on AI and data science and all of that. So talk about these technologies and some use cases from the finance point of view.
Yeah, so a couple of key aspects to keep in mind when we talk about machine learning or AI. All of it's about data, right? So you can have all the algorithms you want, but without the data underneath and the data to feed the decision making, it just doesn't really add value. But when we start to look at data, and we look at the data that you have from your company, and then combine it with interesting other data, so data from trusted sources, people like Dun & Bradstreet and companies like Owler and all these other groups that gather data together, we can bring that data together to create some really powerful capabilities, and those capabilities can automatically happen inside the finance function. So what are those, right? So for example, I can provide advice, or we can provide advice about receivables, right? So one of the big problems in companies, and particularly growing companies, is either A, having their DSO get extended, right? So, if I'm a professional services company and I've got a DSO of 51 days, think about what happens in my return to working capital if I can shorten that from 51 days to 41 days, right? Think about the implications of that in terms of the number of people. A great example, just to keep going with that, is what about my write-offs? Right, I read something just the other day, the typical write-off on a growth company is around 5.2%, right? If I can take a 5.2% on a bad debt and I can reduce it in half, I'm not eliminating write-offs. I'm not eliminating DSO, but I'm actually finding small leverage points. What's that impact? And then we have some analyses. We've done some sessions where we can actually show the return to EPS of just simple solutions. You know, take care of DSO, take care of some discounting, which we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Yep.
And I can suddenly turn a balance sheet from negative to positive with just little tiny improvements in terms of efficiency.
That makes a lot of sense, because this is not, I think the key thing to see here is we're not just talking about, you know, whiz-bang technology that sounds interesting. We're talking about really bottom line benefits. You know, if you can save 2% on write-offs, that's huge.
It's huge.
That flows directly to the bottom line, right? So just to build on that, when you come to the enterprise performance management side, we see, you know, technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence impacting a whole range of decisions, from tactical decisions like what Jack talked about, you know, which supplier to pay first, for example, how do we prioritize that, to how do we intelligently allocate budgetary spend towards areas that have the most impact. Because if we understand where we are making money and where we are not, perhaps we want to spend more of our marketing dollars on product lines that are driving more of our profits, right? So how do we do that on an intelligent basis? That's an operational decision. All the way to highly strategic decisions like mergers and acquisitions, which you may do once in a few years, but that have a big impact on your company's performance, right? So we see these technologies, learning technologies, having a huge impact on a range of decisions in the finance function. And it's not just about decision making. As we'll talk later, a lot of time in the finance function today is spent on, you know, doing manual labor or chasing after data. You know, you're spending a lot of time on what I would call as grunt work, right? So how can we take some of that grunt work away from you and let you focus on more value-added things? So that's an area where we see a lot of potential for impact as well, okay? All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Now let's talk about what are we as Oracle doing? You know, where is our strategic investment going as it relates to these new technologies? What do we see as priorities? Start with you, Jack.
Great. So we're working on right now building a set of capabilities that would stretch across finance. One of the more interesting ones to talk about, because it's just exciting, is this idea of reevaluating your relationship with your suppliers with up-to-the-date information about that situation and be able to do something called dynamic discounting. So instead of having a set, you know, 210 net 30 contract and I'm just going to pay out on that,
Yep.
you know, look at my cash flow situation at any one time and either A, renegotiate terms on the fly with my suppliers in terms of stretching out my payments, or B, if I've got cash, can I actually have a different term and condition to that? Now, the way we do that is we'll take a look at the historical payment patterns for you and your suppliers and their relationships, as well as all that business data I was talking about. So there might be a change in the environment, either for an individual supplier or a market segment. We actually have the algorithms that can crunch all that together and put those recommendations right in place.
Yep.
And that type of capability, you know, you might have tried to do it every 6 months or every year, or sometimes people don't evaluate their suppliers for every 3 years. We're talking about having it up to date, minute by minute, day by day, in terms of the system. So you can actually get a real efficiency out of it.
Okay. No, that's a really good example. But one thing I want to draw out from that example that you mentioned, Jack, is I didn't hear you talking about delivering technology to our customers. You talked about building this technology into our applications.
That's right.
So talk more about that.
That's right. So all of the capabilities that we're working on, whether it's the machine learning, whether it's the blockchain, things like that, we're really first focused about actually making it part of the application itself. It's not like you have to go and hire a large consulting arm to come in to build these core capabilities. For the 80–90% of the use cases that we're talking about, in terms of the finance department, in terms of supply chain, these are capabilities that are going to start to exist soon, and then over time they'll continue to advance and improve in capabilities. You always have the ability to extend if you have a very specific use case to your business. So, you know, like for example, inspection of airplane parts isn't something I'm going to build. But boy, the ability to negotiate dynamically with airplane suppliers, the ability to look at, you know, either through blockchain or through this third-party data to understand the provenance of that airplane part, we're going to provide that capability and all of those types of capabilities right out of the box.
Yeah, this is an important point to sort of take note of, right? So we're not throwing technology at you and saying, go bring an army of consultants to sort of figure out how to make use of this technology. We're sort of thinking about specific use cases for these technologies and building them right into our applications so that the bar for consumption is lower, so you can start worrying about what are the right use cases in the context of your business as opposed to trying to figure out, just to use an example, what the heck is random forest algorithm and how do I use this, right? That's not what finance professionals should be thinking about. You should be thinking about what are the right use cases and how do I configure a capability to sort of address that use case. Rob, you want to talk about blockchain and what you see as the investments we are making and the use cases we're addressing?
Sure. So, just kind of building on the points that Jack and Hari made, we are looking at leveraging blockchain where it makes sense and building it directly into our services so that it's essentially available to you. You may know that a certain capability is based on top of blockchain because we're having this discussion, but that's not really the important point. The important point is the capability itself. As I mentioned before, we're targeting intercompany activity as one of our earliest blockchain use cases, but we see this technology being leveraged in a lot of other areas around actual material movement. We've been partnering with a number of customers looking at inventory transfers, so where one of our customers, for example, is a very kind of vertically integrated organization. They have lots of material transfers between factories and warehouses, and leveraging blockchain to, again, ensure the single source of truth that's distributed, that's available to everybody who needs that information. So we're building this on top of a blockchain cloud service that Oracle itself is delivering. But again, that's fairly transparent. You don't need to know about that. The point is not to be giving you technology. The point is to be giving you the capabilities.
Makes sense. So let me, as in my panelist role, let me talk a little bit about what we're doing in the enterprise performance management area, right? So on EPM, we're focusing on two areas. One relates to decision making. The second relates to automation, right? Decision making, we fundamentally believe that technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning have the ability to sort of elevate decision making to a different level where decisions are made on facts, and the facts can come from data both inside the company and, to Jack's point, from outside the company. So take a simple example. If you're looking at something like forecasting, which most of us deal with on a daily basis, right? So there are forecasts, and as actuals come in, you try to project forward the actuals and see how they are tracking against the forecast. And oftentimes there is a variance, and in many cases, unfortunately, it's a negative variance, right? So you're trying to see, why is there a gap between the projected actuals and the forecast, and how do I deal with this? Today, when there is such a gap, we are running around trying to figure out, trying to find all the data, dump data into spreadsheets, trying to figure out what's going on, where is this variance coming from, and what are the root causes, and there's a lot of firefighting that goes on. What if we have, intelligent algorithms running in the background, tapping into not only your internal data, but also market data, and figuring out root causes of the variance and giving it to you in the context of your decisions? Wouldn't life be much better, right? More importantly, what if these algorithms are not only looking at data patterns, they also are smart enough to figure out behavioral patterns. So what do I mean by that? So if there is a systematic pattern where one of your divisions is sort of pessimistic about their forecast, they always under forecast, let's say, the machine is able to pick up those kinds of biases far better than what people are able to do, and then surface it in the context of your decision. So that's what I mean by these technologies fundamentally transforming decisions.
Or for a lot of companies, the inverse.
Yeah.
Right? The last day of the quarter, what?
Yeah.
Right? Because we can actually understand that and learn over time, because every company's slightly different. So these aren't set algorithms that are just out of the box and then have to be hand-tuned. They actually learn and adapt to your company's data shape. That's a new phrase, but there is a shape to your data. And it will automatically learn to your data shape, and then it automatically learns over time through your use. So it becomes a very personalized or companyized, not sure that's the word,
one-to-one,
to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the second area where we're making a lot of investments is really more mundane, but has got a lot of potential for value. This is really process automation, right? Some people call it robotic process automation. We prefer the term intelligent process automation because we don't want to take an existing process and just re-implement it. We want to sort of improve it as part of automation, right? And this applies to a variety of areas, right? It spans across what we work on, what Rob works on, account reconciliations or financial close process tasks, task orchestration, journal entry posting, all kinds of things where we think 60, 70, 80% of manual labor can be replaced through automation. And we're not talking about replacing people. We are just saying the grunt work can be done by algorithms. Therefore, we free up for you to do more interesting things, more challenging things, things that require more of human judgment. So decision-making, automation, those are two areas where we see a lot of potential in the context of performance management. So we are getting to the end of the session now quickly. So let's go around, talk a little bit about what you see as key takeaways. More importantly, what should people in the audience sort of do to better prepare themselves or position themselves to take advantage of these technologies?
Yeah, so what should you do? Well, first of all, get to the cloud, right? Because a lot of these technologies are relying on the cloud infrastructure, data, movement, everything else that we're putting into the underlying capability. And for those of you that are in the cloud, start to use the system, right? Because we take advantage of all that data. Now, in terms of a lot of the machine learning capabilities, they're going to start just to show up. So over the next 12, 18, 24 months, they're going to start to show up. And what you need to do is have the courage to say, tell you what, let me flip that on, let me get going, right? For a lot of these things, they may be quite subtle, but that's really the way, is to get going. You don't have to come up with a grand strategy. You can just decide, hey, I'm going to grab that, like the discounts. I'm going to grab that, let's try it out, and then let's see how it goes for you. And by the way, get in touch with us if you have a thought about it as it goes. And that's really it, get going.
Excellent. Rob?
Yeah, just to add to Jack's points, one of the key benefits, of course, of being on the cloud is that we're able to deliver enhancements, new capabilities much more quickly than we were in the past, and you are able to take advantage of them much more quickly, right? In the past, we might roll something out, it might be 2-3 years before our customers would actually be able to take advantage of it in an on-premise environment where there are upgrade schedules that need to be worked out and so on. We're now pushing new features out on a very regular basis in an opt-in only mode, right? So we don't want to be disrupting anything. We don't want to be, causing any kind of confusion. And so we'll roll out new features. They'll roll into your environment, and you will then choose when to opt in to take advantage of it. And so what I encourage you to do is really stay on top of it. Be aware of what's coming, because as Jack said, we're going to be rolling these things out. And we're not going to be changing things on you without you knowing about it. We're not going to be imposing, user experience type changes or anything like that. But there's going to be a lot of very compelling capabilities coming out that you really should keep up with so that you know when something's coming and you're able to take advantage of it.
Very good advice. I want to add a couple of bits of advice to that as well. The first thing is, I think it makes sense to get started. Don't wait. Get started. Look for areas that have the potential for quick wins or demonstrable success, right? And then create a showcase around it. That's an important thing. So don't wait, just get started. And in getting started, I think there are two things that are important. Let me net it out, right? The first one, I'd like to call it as mindset, which is the organizational attitude towards this kind of technology. So I think you want to have a optimistic approach to these technologies, because they have a lot of potential. It's up to you to sort of figure out how to use it in your context. So embrace it, start using it. So it's the mindset, and oftentimes it flows from the top. If your CFO is optimistic about technology, then the rest of the organization is probably in the same place, right? So it starts from the top, create the right mindset for technology adoption. The second point is really skill set. So it's not enough if you just have the right mindset. You got to build a team of people who are not necessarily deep in technology, but who have a good appreciation for the technology, appreciation for the impact of technology within your business contexts, right? So start building that team. Some of the people inside the company are already there. Put them in key positions. If you need to, go outside and get some talent, right? Through a combination of internal and external resources, create the right skill set. So mindset and skill set, focus on those, and get started sooner rather than later. Thank you, Rob and Jack, and this has been a fascinating conversation. We've got a couple of other sessions later on in breakout where we build on some of these topics, so or come talk to us afterwards, and we'll be around. We're happy to tell you more about what we're doing in blockchain or AI or performance management. Thank you.
Thank you.